Welcome to Startup Conversations from Lab Launch. I'm your host, Llewellyn Cox. I'm the CEO and founder of Lab Launch. We provide affordable, accessible lab facilities for small and startup biotechnology companies, primarily in the Southern California area. We're very pleased today to welcome our guest, Shahram Seyedin-Noor, the founder and general partner of Civilization Ventures. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Llewellyn. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Likewise. So you've had a varied career. You've been a founder and now you run your own venture firm. So maybe we could start off and just kind of tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up where you are today.
Sure. Thank you. I'll try to keep it brief. So I started in Silicon Valley about 21 years ago after graduating from law school at Harvard. Not the normal background for a life science entrepreneur. But I knew even in law school, I knew that I wanted to be involved in entrepreneurship. There was actually a class taught by Lawrence Lessig and Jonathan Zittrain, who were two luminaries in the kind of legal world as it affects startups and IP protection. At the time, Professor Lessig was actually the special prosecutor for Microsoft's antitrust suit with the government. So it was a very unusual class at law school. The class basically was go start a business. At the time, this was 1999. I graduated from law school in 99. The internet was just kind of reaching its zenith. And so I just, with a couple of my classmates, started an online art store called Artopa. And it was a lot of fun. We actually ended up not pursuing the business because, after getting my grade in the class, which was great, I had a lot of law school and educational debt to pay off. And I thought, I think I better go and get a real job and do something, which is how I started my career at Wilson Sonsini here in the Bay Area, one of the preeminent tech law firms. Spent some time at Goldman Sachs on the finance side of things, really trying to understand the business side of startups. And then I jumped into my first life science startup out of Stanford, a company called NextBio. That was doing a software analytics platform for genomics data. I was a founding CFO and head of business. Grew that company to about 50, 60 people, raised a good amount of capital and sold it to Illumina eventually. So that was my first foray as an operator, as an executive in the company. And then I started another company after that called Argenx. Now it's being rebranded as Inspirna, similar to Moderna with RNA at the end of it, that uses RNA as molecular probes for novel pathway discovery in cancer. The technology I licensed out of Rockefeller University with four co-founders, three of them are brothers, and MD PhDs. And that company is now in phase 2 clinical trials in oncology, having raised close to 100 million. So within the first 15 years of my career, I had the benefit of both seeing the legal finance side as a service provider, but then also being an operator and actually raising capital from VCs, growing companies, hiring tens of employees. And that really gave me the confidence and I think the expertise, and more importantly, scar tissue, failure as well as some successes, to feel like it was time for me to give back in a different way as a VC. And by the way, I never thought about 20 years ago, if you would have asked me, are you going to be a venture capitalist? I probably, really didn't know what it was. And of course, through my own career, as I've interacted with a lot of investors, I've learned a lot more about what venture capital is, but I still didn't know I didn't really have any close contacts. No, it's not as if my father was a VC or anything like that. I just kind of went into it as a founder, as an entrepreneur. So I treated the founding of my firm like a startup, which is how I've treated everything else over the last 10, 15 years. And that ended up being, I think, a good strategy. And I could tell you more about that as well, but I'll stop there.
Fantastic. And yeah, I think that's a great pivot to kind of talking about what you do at Civilization Ventures and what you look for in startups. So when you look at new and emerging companies, what's one of the most important things for you as you consider whether there's something you might want to invest in?
Great question, Llewellyn. So I come at this from the perspective of someone that was a founder operator in a startup before. So I feel like that perspective and the domain expertise, obviously, in healthcare and life sciences, informs everything that we do. By the way, at Civilization Ventures, we're a 3-person team. It's myself as VP. Tomas Khan is our vice president. He's a PhD from Stanford with deep expertise, obviously, in biology. And he worked on brain organoid models when he was at Stanford. And we have my analyst, Zoya Khan, same last name, no relation to Tomas. who's also an expert with a neuroscience undergraduate degree and has done a lot of work in digital health. So it's not just me. But when we look at companies, I mean, we first focus on founders. I have to say that even though what we do, Llewellyn, is deep tech, and it involves a lot of IP analysis, a lot of landscape analysis, market framing, et cetera, fundamentally, these companies are human endeavors, just like our firm. And so we focus on the founders. At least half the equation is just asking questions of the founders, understanding their relationship if there are multiple founders. If there's only one founder, trying to understand their grit and how they're going to persevere as a single founder, kind of a lonely position to be in, given how hard startups are. So the verticals we invest in, worth mentioning, are three: genomics and diagnostics, digital health and artificial intelligence in healthcare, and synthetic biology and genetic engineering. So this includes therapeutics, industrial applications, et cetera. And assuming a startup meets our thesis, and assuming that the IP is protectable in some way and is certainly not infringing on someone else, we then really focus on founders. Why did they start this company? Do they have, and this is extremely important, an unfair advantage, a highly differentiated advantage? Because you can't, I mean, anyone can start a company or a startup, but not anyone can succeed in doing so. And I think it's so tough. Even if capital raising is easy in today's world, which it is, it doesn't mean that running a company will be easy, or that exiting a company or being successful is easy. That's never easy. And so we really focus on, why is the founder doing this? What's their motivation? If there are multiple founders, what is their relationship? Have they worked together before, or are they kind of getting married on the first date and starting a company together? Speaking of marriage, we focus on, are they married? Are they siblings, et cetera? Because sometimes that could have an influence as well. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative, but we try to be, there's no one size fits all rule. We try to be nuanced in our analysis, but we look at these factors very, very carefully. Because as an entrepreneur who's done multiple companies, I've seen co-founder issues. I've been involved in co-founder issues. I've seen the good, the bad, the ugly. I have scar tissue and successes. Honestly, I've always learned more from the scar tissue, from the challenges we had, than from the successes. I think people look at startups and read a report that comes out in some newsletter saying, oh, this company got sold or went public, and they think, oh, that was easy, it only took 5 years. They have no idea that those 5 years were probably like dog years, really like 35 years for the founders, and all the destroyed relationships that might be a part of that, all the learnings, and those things people don't talk about, but I know that they're an important part of the startup journey. So I try to kind of get at that in my initial discussion with founders. Of course, it's been a little bit more difficult with the pandemic because we can't see people in person as readily, and so you try to glean that information on Zoom.
Really interesting stuff, and you talk about looking at founders, and especially as we think about people who are new to entrepreneurship, they're likely technical founders, they're scientists who have an idea for how they could commercialize a discovery. How do you work, or how do you think about rather those kind of first-time technical founders who may not know some of the bigger issues around, like you say, the management of a business, such as the market and the legal side of things? What are the things that founders should be thinking about as they're starting to put together, their business?
Beautiful question, and actually, I'm going to use that question as an opportunity to highlight one of the reasons I started the firm, which is the model of entrepreneurship that I was advocating and that I was really a part of as a 32-year-old founding executive at NextBio, and then a 35-year-old founder of Argenx, now relabeled as Inspirna, was that of the young entrepreneur, kind of, no ageism here, but rather the inexperienced, I should say, entrepreneur. So, and I experienced a ton of rejection from investors, but also just biases against people that are doing it, who are just fresh. My co-founders were always fresh PhDs out of academia. I'm not a PhD, but I was also quite young at the time. And so and I realized, biotech is different than tech. This is a staid industry with executives that traditionally have been much older when they started companies. And I wanted to advocate a model that also was inclusive of PhDs coming straight out of their programs, who didn't want to give away 99% of their company in the first financing round, who didn't want to be incubated by a big firm that essentially would treat them as employees, who didn't want to be subordinated to a PI or professor who had the relationship with a venture firm, and we kind of put the postdoc as first scientist and employee, but never as a founder, really. And so, and I thought that we're frankly in a new era of biology. So stepping back, I started my career in 1999, right? Really before the completion of the Human Genome Project, certainly before the commonplace application of AI, the advancements in next-gen sequencing. All these things have happened since I started my career. And so I do feel that one of the benefits of having some gray hair and age is that I've been a part of the evolution of the industry and have experienced that. And what we're seeing today in terms of the number of companies that are present in these thesis areas of digital health, genomics, synthetic biology, it's really an order of magnitude more than it was 20 years ago. When I was raising capital for NextBio with my CEO and team, it was incredibly difficult. I mean, we literally were rejected by 99% of the VCs we talked to, not figuratively speaking, but literally speaking. I had a list of 80 VCs I reached out to when I was raising capital. For Argenx, much the same story. So, by the way, hint to founders, don't be dismayed if you have a 99% rejection rate. So did I. But once you hit the success and you start experiencing positive tailwinds, there's no stopping you. And so you have to have the grit to be able to experience that. But I realized that the thesis areas that I was working in and that I had experience in scar tissue and in my network is now extremely prominent. Now, almost every tech VC firm wants to do bio. You have people investing in bio who, barely understand the difference between DNA and RNA. You could ask them very fundamental questions, they won't know the answers, which is okay, by the way. I invite that kind of capital to our industry. But I did realize that, wow, there's a whole new brand of founder. Is a founder who is recently graduating with a PhD. Sometimes she still may be in school getting her PhD. And they really require mentorship. To your point, Llewellyn, about how do I treat founders who don't know what they're doing when it comes to markets or competitive dynamics or just business stuff. We teach them that. So we're not going to be biased against someone because they come with just pure scientific intelligence and don't have the experience. We actually invite that kind of entrepreneur and help fill in the holes. So we have now close to 50 companies in our portfolio. And you'd be shocked at how much time we spend with each of them, even those where we write only a $100,000 check versus our largest investment has been $11 million to date in a single company in a single round. So obviously it's episodal. We don't spend 10 hours a day with every company every day. But when a company comes to us and says, hey, we just hit a technical milestone and we'd love to talk to my firm Civilization Ventures about how we can kind of go raise capital or present ourselves to other VCs or do X, Y, and Z. I sit down with them and say, look, this deck that you're presenting to me is missing these elements. Look, your team is missing this person. Let me introduce you to her. We have 5 people that are CMOs in our chief medical officer types in our roster of advisors who are extremely senior at places like Roche. We have 5 people who are AI experts who are running companies like Grail. We have 10 people who are chief commercial officers. Let me introduce you to one of them to help you put forth your and devise your commercial strategy. Every single thing I mentioned, I've actually done for our portfolio companies. And so far from being deterred because a portfolio founder or a prospective portfolio founder expresses ignorance or lack of experience with respect to business issues, we like to step in and fill that void and to help them become more intelligent.
That's great to hear, and I think it was you who introduced me to the phrase mentor capital, which I think is very inspirational for those of us who've been through the grind. And actually, that kind of makes me wonder as well. One of the biggest challenges that we come across with scientific founders, especially those who are very early on in the process, is the question of how can you build a team and what is really important for an entrepreneur as they're starting out with a business idea and thinking about building that first 2 or 3 people they're going to be working with for probably a number of years and probably in a pretty low cash situation. What's really important for an entrepreneur as they think about putting their initial team together?
That's an important question. I would split the question into 2 different questions. One is co-founder relationships, and then first employees, because they are different. The first thing I would say is I don't advise founders to add co-founders for the sake of saying they have co-founders. I know that Y Combinator historically had told founders to come back when they had a partner because sole founders were considered too risky. And I think that was a wise move. Obviously, Y Combinator is the absolute gold standard in our industry and every industry with respect to mentorship and helping startups. And I really applaud Paul Graham and his work. But I think in my personal and humble opinion, it is better to be a sole founder than to attach a co-founder to your team just so you can placate someone else's expectations. I don't think that makes any sense. I think co-founder relationships are very intimate and complicated, and it's like a marriage, and you shouldn't have it unless you really know that you get along with that person. So we like to see founders whose co-founders they've worked with before. They have an authentic and organic relationship, which is based in the science. For example, they may have been in the lab together. One might have been the professor, the other the postdoc, grad student, etc. Those are the kind of co-founder relationships we like. We don't like, in general, to see husband and wife teams because they get along, they want to do everything together all day long, and they just add their siblings and their husbands and their wives for no rationale other than the fact that they want to be with them all the time. That for me is a mistake. You then take all the complexities of your sibling or marriage relationship and put it into the company. And if one fails, the other will fail. So like if your company fails, it'll impact your marriage. If your marriage fails, it'll impact your company. That's why we're very cautious when we look at those types of companies. But going back to your original question, so the co-founder relationship is one that we take very seriously. The first hires are separate from that. And there, we really just kind of leave it to the founder to tell us what skill set they need. And if the first 1, 2, 3 employees fill it. Sometimes you make mistakes. No one is perfect. The best advice I could give to founders is if you made a mistake in one of your first 2, 3 hires, fire them quickly because you will not recover from that. If someone, I've had the experience before where I hired someone who's a wonderful person, by the way, someone that I really liked, who was kind of a 9 to 5er or even maybe a 10 to 5er. They would show up at 10, they would leave at 5, and here I am as the founder in the company at 9 there until midnight. And I just didn't think it was congruent for the employee not to understand that. And so we should have let that person go a lot earlier than we did. And it ended up damaging the culture of the firm. So I think that you can't expect perfection in all your hires, but you should exercise good judgment in hiring people that you think have the right expertise, that have the right cultural fit, the right work ethic, the right, obviously, integrity, incredibly important. You'd be surprised at how many stories we hear besides Theranos of scientists making stuff up. No companies don't come out and say, we have to let this person go because they were fabricating data because that's damaging to them, but it happens, as you probably know as well. And we have relationships with teams where we find this stuff out, but you never know. So I would say that don't overthink trying to make the perfect decision. You need to hire quickly. You need to scale, quickly, but just exercise good judgment. And we've been helpful. We've tried to be helpful with our early portfolio companies when they hire their first few employees. And the way we've been helpful is by making referrals. And so we have a fellowship program now that you might have heard of at Civilization Ventures, where every 3 months we have 8 PhDs from the top institutions in the world come in, learn about venture capital, and we kind of synergize with them and teach them some stuff. But sometimes we actually place them in our companies too. And that's happened a few times and it's been very gratifying. In other cases where the CEO co-founder herself sourced their first employees, they sometimes have us speak with the employee to help close them. And that's something that we're always happy to do as well.
That's fantastic, and I think that's quite unusual in at least historically in the world of venture, and I think it's very much needed, especially as you point out, with a lot of technical founders who may not have experience, in the business world, trying to get their feet. And so we just have a few minutes left, and so I think kind of the key question is really, what is your advice to a young, and we're not talking about age, a first-time founder who has a really cool idea, they have scientific validity to what they want to do. What's your advice to them as they're thinking about putting their company together and maybe thinking about asking Civilization Ventures to invest in them?
My advice is let's begin the discussion. We're here to add value. And 99% of the companies that we speak with, by definition, we can't invest in them. You know, so our second fund is 35 million. Right now, we've invested between 50 and 100 million in companies, and so we're limited. We're not a $10 billion fund, nor do we ever aspire to be, you know, that big and unwieldy. And so you never know who you're going to get along with and what pearls will drop from someone until you speak with them. So we invite all discussions. Now, we don't always take live meetings. We try to at least look at presentations ahead of time and see if it's going to be a good use of everyone's time. But we try to take, certainly with PhDs and PhDs with credible scientific innovations, we always take meetings. Almost 99% of the time we'll take a meeting. And we do that so that we can really just learn about them and add value even on a call. One of the things that I do, which I don't think is conventional, is I try to be honest. If someone has something which is pretty fatally flawed in their presentation or some blind spot they're not aware of, I will tell them that on the call. I think what you find with a lot of investors is that they're shy. They don't want to offend someone, but there's a way to tell someone the truth without offending them. And that is an art that we are still working to perfect, but it's an important art because you do have to add value to people's lives. You know, if you're spending 8 hours a day as we are on calls with founders, there are two ways to approach that. One is just to sit there all day and say no 99% of the time and just, you know, move on, or genuinely engage with the people you're speaking with, even if you know it's not going to be a good fit for this round for Civilization Ventures to invest, and still add value. And that's what we try to do. We try to ask scientific questions that hopefully probe their minds. We try to indicate to them the kinds of metrics they need to be aware of to raise this round and future rounds. We try to make them aware of their own competitive landscape if they're not aware of it, which is common. You'd be surprised at how many entrepreneurs have far less knowledge than a well-connected VC when it comes to their own industry, because, you know, we see thousands of pitches. They kind of are in their own silo. And so we try to add value in that way, while always obviously preserving confidentiality.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today. This has been a really informative discussion. I've really enjoyed hearing your story and how you work at Civilization Ventures. If people want to get in touch with your firm and ask questions, how should they go about that?
They should simply send an email to info @civilizationventures.com. Or my personal email, which is Shahram @civilizationventures.com. And we are always super happy to engage and learn and humbly add value if we can to any founder's journey. And thank you for having me, Llewellyn.
Wonderful. And thank you again for joining us. This has been a wonderful discussion. For those of you watching live, if you missed anything, this episode will be posted to Lab Launch's YouTube channel, along with all of our other Startup Conversations episodes shortly. Thank you again, Shahram, for joining us today. It's been a great discussion, and we look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Take care.
And awesome work. Thank you so much.